Oh, Atlus. The company that is today known as the company that makes SMT and Persona, and nothing else. At this point in time, Atlus and Persona are pretty much synonymous with one another, to the point that even Atlus games that have absolutely nothing to do with either SMT or Persona still get compared to it by game journalists. Because of this, a lot of people seem to forget that Atlus, more specifically Atlus USA/Atlus West, actually has a very rich history of localizing and publishing Japanese games from all kinds of different developers in North America. Unfortunately, Atlus USA's days of publishing are but a bygone era, but there are still just so many sleeper hits from these days, and even though I've already made 2 videos on this, I keep making them because there are just so many of these games to cover, and only so many that I can talk about in a single video. And that is exactly what I'm going to be doing once again, for the 3rd time. These are even more obscure Atlus games you should check out. But first, a word from our sponsor. The internet is becoming an increasingly dangerous place for anyone that uses it. Big corporations, cyber criminals, and your government could be monitoring your web activity without your consent, which is why you need NordVPN. NordVPN is the industry leader in both quality and customer service when it comes to VPNs. They have over 5,200 high-speed servers in 59 countries that supports up to 6 simultaneous connections with double data encryption and no data logging whatsoever. This will protect your data on both local and public networks. Best of all, if you're experiencing issues, NordVPN has 24-hour customer support, and if that's still not enough, it has a 30-day money-back guarantee. But that's not all. Included are Nord Links and CyberSec, which will make your browsing both faster and safer. If you subscribe right now using the link in the description and the coupon code NYARLY, you will get a 2-year deal at 68% off, plus an additional 4 months for free. I want to give a big thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and now, let's get back to the video. Now, you all know about From Software, right? Most people today know them as the developers of Sekiro and the Souls series. However, just like Atlus, they have a long and varied history of games under their belt, both developed and published in Japan. When people think of From Software games localized by Atlus, they immediately think of the original Demon Souls. But there is another one that isn't talked about nearly as much: 3D Game Heroes for the PS3. 3D Game Heroes is best described as a parody/tribute to classic adventure games, and by that, I pretty much mean Zelda. It's basically a 3D environment classic Zelda game. I mean, it's got everything: the combat, the enemies, the menu screens, the grid-based overworld, the scrolling load screens, the hearts, the heart pieces, the heart containers, the dungeon layouts, the keys, the items. If Zelda has it, it is in 3D Game Heroes in some way or another. There's always a question you gotta ask yourself when you play games like this. Where do you draw the line between a game being a homage and being a ripoff? And where do you cross it? No matter how you look at it, 3D Game Heroes teeters very close to that line if it doesn't already cross it. But whether you consider this game a passionate tribute, a faithful recreation, or just plagiarism, 3D Game Heroes really succeeds at capturing the sense of accomplishment and adventurism that makes The Legend of Zelda great. You know, going to towns, exploring the overworld, finding hidden secrets, traversing dungeons, acquiring new items, and going from what feels like a helpless child to a strong and capable hero that can do just about anything. That's not to say it's exactly like Zelda though. For one thing, you can choose from a wide variety of characters to play as, including Sony's very own Sackboy. And it even has a character creator, so if you really want it to feel like a Zelda game, you can make Link. And then there's the combat. Again, it's pretty much like 2D Zelda, but when your health bar is full, instead of your sword shooting lasers, your sword grows to this massive size that can hit just about any target in one swing. You can even upgrade your sword to be even longer and wider, and it's hilarious how powerful you can become. On top of that, despite being on a console that's 2 generations old, this game still looks beautiful and has lots of charm, and some amazing 8-bit style and orchestrated soundtracks that fit perfectly with the game. This game was published by FromSoft in Japan and Atlus USA in North America, but it was actually developed by Silicon Studio, who would later go on to develop the Bravely Default series. And isn't that appropriate? A studio that developed a game that's basically a throwback to classic 2D adventures, would do the same with classic JRPGs. Whatever the case is, if you're a Zelda fan seeking some kind of a new experience or just looking to relive some good old nostalgia, 3D Game Heroes is a great game that you cannot go wrong with. This next one is one that some of you might vaguely be familiar with. You may have seen or heard about it before it came out, but then forgot about it along with everyone else, because if more people were talking about this game, I wouldn't need to. Not in this video, anyway. The game I'm talking about is Lost Dimension for the PS3 and PS Vita. This is a game that has a very complicated history with Atlus. The story is written by the scriptwriter for the Persona 3 movies, and the game was developed by Len Kars, who hasn't done much in recent years, but did assist in the development of Strange Journey and Etrian Odyssey 1 and 2. It was published by Furyu in Japan in 2014, and then brought west by Atlus USA in 2015. And from what I remember, there was actually a bit of a cult following that was hyped up for this game, and for a PS3 and Vita game in 2015, didn't actually do too bad, but after that, everyone just kind of forgot about it, which sucks because Lost Dimension is a pretty good game. So, Lost Dimension is a turn-based tactical RPG that takes place in a world on the brink of annihilation. The story is that a Hot Topic model who calls himself the End brings some kind of tower down to Earth, steals a bunch of nuclear missile launch codes, and then threatens to destroy the Earth in 13 days. So, the UN responds by sending a bunch of teenagers with psychic powers to reach the top and stop him. Once the game starts, you find out that you and the other party members have lost most of your memories. It's pretty cliche and not the most interesting or thought-provoking story, but I do like the way it's told, where the info is extremely vague at the start, but more about the plot is revealed as the game goes on, and it does give you the motivation to keep playing. But what really makes this game interesting is that out of the main cast, 5 of them are actually traitors, and the party votes out whoever they think the traitor is at several points throughout the game. But the interesting part is that who is and isn't the traitor isn't actually part of the story. It's randomly decided by the game. It's up to you to figure out who the traitor is and vote them off. And in both my playthroughs of this game, my favorite character was the first one to go, so that was nice. The combat is, well, the best way I can describe it is kind of like Trails of Cold Steel or Hyperdimension Neptunia, but if they were SRPGs. You can select up to 6 units to bring into battle, and they all move around the map freely. If units are close to one another, they can do assist attacks, which, given how much health enemies have, you're going to be relying on this a lot to defeat them, especially when fighting the bosses. Just be careful because the enemies can do the same to you. Now, each of the units have their own unique special power, like you have Agito who can teleport, Himeno who can firebend, Mana who is super strong, and Zenji who can copy other party members' abilities, just to name a few. You can customize your unit's special powers through this skill tree system that works a lot like the skill tree in Digital Devil Saga 1, and it is a lot of fun to mess around with. On top of that, it even has light social sim elements. Yeah, talk to your party members in between battles to build trust with them and learn more about them. And if you get them high enough, you unlock their quests at the end. Some of you may be thinking, oh great, another game with social sim elements shoehorned in. But these conversations are actually pretty short, and do a good job of developing the characters with minimal dialogue. And while Lost Dimension isn't going to blow you away with its graphics, the artwork is nice, the voice acting is good, the soundtrack is great, and it has a sweet opening with an awesome song by J-pop duo Fripside, who has in the past done several opening songs for visual novels and popular anime like A Certain Scientific Railgun and Black Bullet. Sadly, the PS3 and Vita versions of this game are kinda hard to find, but like a lot of Japanese RPGs that came out at the time, it was re-released on Steam, and thankfully Steam reviews seem to be much more favorable this time around. In fact, at the time I'm writing this script, it's on sale for $6.24. It'll probably be over by the time this video is up, but if you see it on sale again, I highly recommend buying it. There is a lot to love about Lost Dimension. This next one is probably the best known one on the list, and it's one that some of you have probably heard mentioned once or twice, but haven't actually played, and that game is Radiant Historia. It was developed by both Atlus and Headlock and released for the DS in 2010, and re-released for the 3DS as Perfect Chronology in 2017, with their Western releases coming the following year. I remember the original being kinda popular back in the day and appearing on many top whatever underrated DS games list, but since the release of Perfect Chronology, I've not heard a single thing about it. Radiant Historia is a turn-based RPG that is, in many ways, a throwback to classic RPGs, but also innovates in many ways too. It takes place in a fantasy setting where two nations are at war with one another. You take on the role of an espionage agent named Stock, who, after escaping an ambush barely alive, finds himself in a place called Historia, where he has the ability to alter past events. The story is very interesting and surprisingly well written with some great characters. But what's really cool about Radiant Historia's story is that it basically follows two timelines. I'm not going to spoil what happens, but in the story there's a part where your path splits, and the story has you going to and from Historia to simultaneously partake in both timelines. You would think this would create an incomprehensible mess of everything bad in Japanese storytelling, but it doesn't. I was really invested in this game's story and its world, and I just had to keep playing. Though I suppose this shouldn't be too surprising, as the lead writer for this game also wrote the scenario for Devil Survivor. But where Radiant Historia really shines is in the combat. It's turn-based, but there's more to it than just hitting the enemy with your best attacks. It takes place on this 3x3 grid, which you can move to and from different spaces on, but you can also use your moves to knock your enemies around to different spaces. The idea of the combat is to use your moves to knock multiple enemies into the same space and then attack them all at once. Doing this and landing these combos is a lot of fun and really satisfying. Radiant Historia is also surprisingly challenging. Making poor use of your turns and combo attacks can easily lead to a game over and or just wasting a lot of MP. Outside of combat, you've got dungeon crawling and an explorable world with lots of hidden secrets to look for and puzzles to solve in order to reach the next area, many of which involve you going to and from different timelines using Historia, and it's a lot of fun. To top it all off, Radiant Historia has a great soundtrack with some absolutely beautiful artwork for both versions. Radiant Historia is a great game that's both classic and innovative at the same time. Both versions are great, but with the release of Perfect Chronology, there's really not much reason to go back to the original. Finding a physical copy will be a bit difficult, but thankfully you can still buy this game on the eShop, and if you want, you can even download a playable demo for free. But whether you decide to play the demo first or not, you cannot go wrong with Radiant Historia. This last one is one that's been on the corner of my mind for a while, but didn't get around to playing until recently. This game is Monster Kingdom Jewel Summoner. Just like Lost Dimension, this is another game that has a complicated relationship with Atlus, but this one is even weirder. Now, any Megaton veteran should be familiar with the name Koji Okada. He, along with Kazuma Kaneko, helped found Atlus in 1986, and was one of the lead developers for most of the Megami Tensei series until 2003, when he made the decision to leave Atlus to form his own company, Gaia. If that name doesn't sound familiar, you're forgiven because they didn't last long, only until 2010, and they only ever worked on 6 games, only 2 of which made it west. And, in a weird form of irony, Atlus USA was the publisher of their first game in North America. But anyway, Monster Kingdom Jewel Summoner, as the name suggests, is a game where you summon monsters from jewels. You may be thinking that because Koji Okada was the lead producer for it, that it has a lot of similarities to Megami Tensei, which it does have a few, but it's actually more similar to Pokemon. The monsters and moves all have different types, and there's an elemental circle with each element having its own strengths and weaknesses. You also don't negotiate with monsters, you instead weaken them and capture them in prisms, which are basically Pokeballs. This game even has field abilities, which are basically HMs. In fact, you can even strengthen and evolve your monsters through a process called amalgamy. Outside of the combat and dungeon crawling, you can mess around in different locations, but don't actually get to explore the overworld. You instead navigate it by moving your pointer to and from different locations that you can visit, and cutscenes play out in this visual novel style, just like Persona 3 Portable. This may be a turnoff for some people, but that's how I like it. Simple, fast, and easy. The story is that you're this guy who hunts monsters called abominations, who, after losing a powerful monster he controls, joins an academy for training jewel summoners. From here, you're sent on quests with other summoners to fight monsters and abominations. The thing about Jewel Summoner is that being a JRPG that released for the PSP in 2006, it is very much a relic of its time, with all the defining cliches that JRPGs are infamous for, like random encounters, save points, long cutscenes, decent artwork with ridiculous character designs, some not-so-good voice acting with a not-so-good translation, hilarious dialogue, fan service, and a decent but incohesive soundtrack. But you know what? That's kind of what I like about it. It gives this game this weird nostalgic charm that only games from this time period and mostly on this console have. I'll be honest, I didn't like Jewel Summoner at first, but the more I played it, the more I found myself enjoying this game for a lot of the same reasons I liked playing Pokemon when I was younger, like running around trying to find monsters that I need, experimenting with all the different monsters and abilities, and just building my team from the dozens of monsters in the game. Plus, the designs for the monsters are pretty cool. Overall, I wouldn't say Jewel Summoner is better than any of the Okada Megaten games, but for a Pokemon clone that was also the first game from this new studio, Jewel Summoner is a pretty solid game that, for all its flaws, also has a lot of redeeming qualities. It's a shame that Gaia had to suffer the fate that it did, because had this game got a sequel, they probably could have turned it into something amazing. Regardless though, Monster Kingdom Jewel Summoner is a decent game that I think is at least worth checking out solely for the purpose of seeing what Okada was up to after he left Atlus. I'm sure a bunch of people also want me to talk about a game called Folklore as well, but that is a topic for another video.
This is the Arlie, and you have entered Eternal Punishment.
One kingdom under us.
Just give up, kid. Know your enemy before you pick a fight.
No such thing as innocent sin, and I know cause I've committed many. Correct my violence to extreme melodies, my own mind, I keep me ablaze. I bring my piece to the diner, we can get busy, make it pop once like Genji. I swear this underground scene really nothing but gossip and rumors since I'm Roof City. You have forgotten me, I've been tied to another world that has already been lost. To our touched by memories, as you remember me, everything you love is gone. Multidimensional, I got this soul to the heavens above once the clock fill them on. In this world you can get killed by ideals, but it's really no secret I die for my cause.